breaking news on the Mueller investigation. We go to the person we always go to, and for good reason. Fox Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge joins us.
Well, thanks, Tucker. Let's just kind of break it down together because there's so much here. So all of this came down for folks at home really late in the day. We had 3 filings over a 90-minute period. Let's start in New York with the president's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen.
Yes.
Okay, so 2 filings, one from the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District, the second from the special counsel. The bottom line on sentencing is that they're recommending significant jail time, about 4 years, and a fine of $500,000. Buried in the special counsel filing is kind of an indicator of what kind of information he's provided on Russia. And I'm just going to go to my glasses and the paper here for a second.
Thank you.
To read the quote. Okay, so it says, Cohen provided the SCO, that's the acronym for Special Counsel Office, with useful information concerning certain discrete Russia-related matters core to its investigation that he obtained by virtue of his regular contact with company executives during the campaign. Cohen provided relevant and useful information concerning his contacts with persons connected to the White House during the 2017 to 2018 period. So what we've got in the filing is kind of a window into this Russian contact, but then we kind of feel a little cheated because we don't know from the filing what happened with those Russian contacts and whether they were appropriate at all or inappropriate.
Okay. That suggests more than it tells.
Exactly. That's my point. It's kind of like a teaser. You see some of this information.
Right.
We already know with Michael Cohen that he pled guilty to lying to Congress about this Moscow real estate deal in 2016. Remember
that did not take place.
That's right. It was a timing issue. Cohen told Congress that they stopped talking about it in January 2016, but in fact they continued the conversations until June. So that was at the height of the presidential campaign and past the Iowa caucuses. So that was kind of a timing issue. But based on the filing today, it looks like there may well be other contacts that were important with the Russians. But again, we don't want to speculate because we don't know what the essence of those contacts are and whether they're relevant to this allegation of coordination or collusion or improper contact.
So we had also today heavily redacted documents pertaining to Paul Manafort. What do we know? What do those tell us?
Well, okay, so Paul Manafort's important because he's the former campaign chairman, and the allegation from the special counsel is that he violated his plea agreement. He pled guilty to a number of crimes, but part of the negotiation is that he would cooperate with the special counsel and he'd look at a reduced jail time, and his wife and his daughter would be able to keep their homes. That was sort of the big sort of bone they were holding out to him. But what happened today is that the judge agreed that part of the filing would be under seal, which means for a lay person that it's not public, that you can't see it. Period, you can't see it. And that would go to ongoing investigations. And then there's a part that is public, but as you've known from seeing it, it's really heavily redacted, that section as well. And it alleges that Manafort broke the agreement by continuing contact with the administration, though he had been told to cease all contact.
Now, there's a story tonight, we can't confirm it, that in parts of that filing that are veiled from public view, the investigations ongoing that are referred to in the document pertain to Tony Podesta.
Right. I don't have that independently, but what I could say just as a data point is that it makes a lot of sense to me because what we've been seeing in the background here is that there is an investigation looking at Tony Podesta and his lobbying work, and also the former, I believe he was the White House counsel under the Obama administration, Greg Craig. And one of the questions Republicans have had is whether the special counsel investigation is only going to look at Republican lobbying efforts that were violating this Foreign Agents Registration Act, or whether, the shoe would be on the other foot and they would look at Democrats.
Manafort, of course, was in effect working with Tony Podesta for quite some time in representing these foreign interests. Catherine Herridge,
thanks for breaking it down.
There's a lot.
Yeah, there was a lot. You're welcome.
We'll see you again. Alan Dershowitz is, of course, a retired and eminent law professor at Harvard. He's also the author of the book, The Case Against Impeaching Trump, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thank you very much for coming on. So all of this is kind of coming out as we're reporting it, and it's hard to assess. But I just want to get to the core allegations once again. So you heard Catherine Herridge say repeatedly that the special counsel says that Michael Cohen is in contact with the Russians at various points. How would that be criminal? Under what circumstances would that be criminal, do you think?
Well, it would only be criminal if, for example, and this is a hypothetical, the campaign or President Trump or somebody in his behalf offered Putin a penthouse apartment at the top of the tower in exchange for getting a permit to build the tower. That would be arguably criminal under the Federal Corrupt Practices Act.
Right.
Short of that, it's very, very hard to see this. What I think we're seeing is a coming attraction to what the report will be. And I think the report will set out a circumstantial case based on all the lying that's taking place, a circumstantial case for arguably political sins. But I don't see any crimes. Collusion itself is not a crime. Using information given by Russia to WikiLeaks would not be a crime unless the campaign participated with WikiLeaks in the hacking itself. And there's no evidence to support that. So what I'm afraid is going to happen is this special counsel, whose job it is only to find crimes, not sins, only crimes, will blur the line between crimes and sins and write a report designed to put the president in a bad light. But in the end, they won't be able to find any specific violations of federal criminal statutes unless they stretch these vague laws like obstruction of justice beyond any recognition.
So is it a prosecutor's job constitutionally to paint a politician or anyone in a, quote, bad light without charging him with relevant crimes? I mean, that's not in his purview,
no,
is it?
it's worse. It's worse than improper. It's unconstitutional. The grand jury has a specific function. It's supposed to only indict or not indict. Indeed, prosecutors generally don't issue reports for that reason because they only hear one side of the case. They don't hear the other side. There's no cross-examination of witnesses. That's why it's regarded as wrong for prosecutors to issue reports. That's what Comey did wrong. He should never have gone beyond saying we're not indicting Hillary Clinton.
Exactly,
In fact, he shouldn't have said it at all. It should have been a Justice Department official. And now I think it's wrong for there to be a public report laying out a political case. Now, at the very least, what has to happen is the new Attorney General has to, if he receives the report, say, I'm not making it public until the other side has had a chance to rebut it and file its own report. Then you get two political reports, one from each side, and the public can judge. But this sounds like a distortion of what prosecutors ought to do. Prosecutors ought to do up and down, indict, not indict.
Exactly.
If you have the evidence of crime, indict. Otherwise, shut up.
So when the special counsel's office releases documents, as they did today, that make cryptic references to meetings with Russia without explaining why this is relevant to the public interest or illegal, does it raise the suspicion that this is a manipulative public relations move rather than a legal one?
Well, it raises the suspicion that the final report will also include allegations of political sin rather than specific crimes. Yeah. And that's just not the proper role of special counsel or any prosecutor. And I hope it doesn't happen. I hope that Mueller, who has a generally good reputation as a prosecutor, will remember that his job essentially was to uncover crimes that occurred before he was appointed. At the moment, most of the crimes he's uncovered occurred after he was appointed. Lying to Congress, lying to prosecutors, and crimes that are unrelated to his mandate. Manafort, financial crimes, Cohen taxi cab crimes. Right. The only crimes he seems to have found relating to Russia are by Russians. And that was not part of his mandate, number one. And number two, nobody's going after these Russians. They're not going to be sent to the United States. They're not coming to Disneyland where they can be arrested. So that's pretty moot.
So very quickly, one final more general question. You've watched our legal system and participated in it for many decades now. Is it common for prosecutors, good people, people of integrity, to become caught up in a kind of vortex of zealotry where they kind of lose sight of the law and become really focused on destroying people?
Well, I think that's the problem with special counsel, because you come in and there's somebody out there or people out there with targets on their back. And in this case, he went after so many people who had close connections to the president in an attempt to get him. You don't have to believe me. Listen to Judge Ellis, who presided over the Manafort case. He was very critical of how the special prosecutor is squeezing people, not only in order to make them sing, but in some cases, people are composing because they think the better the story, the better the deal. It also gives a lesson, an object lesson to criminal defense lawyers. Be careful when you make a deal, because when you make a deal with the prosecutors, they can really come back and hurt you.
Exactly.
Look at what happened to Cohen. He made a deal. The special counsel says he's cooperated, but the U.S. attorney in New York says he still ought to get substantial jail time. That's why in 53 years of practicing law, I have very, very rarely made deals or made pleas with prosecutors because I basically don't trust them. I don't trust the system. The system today is so skewed in favor of prosecutors and against defendants.
We may be losing perspective of this. I just want to remind our viewers on our way out that you are not a figure on the right. You are not a Trump voter. You're merely defending what you think is our tradition of law. And I appreciate that.
And I've been saying the same thing for 55 years. I've been saying the same thing for 55 years. I've expressed the same criticism of prosecutors, whether they go after Democrats or Republicans.
Amen. Alan Dershowitz, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, as we said at the open, there is breaking news from the Mueller investigation. We're not exactly sure what some of it means, but it is coming at us right now. Former FBI Director Jim Comey testified, by the way, on Capitol Hill today. He dropped his initial plans to mount a legal challenge to the subpoena he received from Republicans on the committee. What did we learn from Comey on the Hill? Tom Fitton was watching carefully. He is president of Judicial Watch, here to tell us about that and to assess the Mueller memos we were just talking about. But first to Comey. Tom, thanks for coming on. What did we learn?
Well, we learned that Comey isn't worried about being prosecuted for any misconduct because he didn't take the fifth. And we also learned the FBI and Justice Department are still hampering the investigation by ordering him not to answer many key questions, according to Republicans who've complained about the way it proceeded.
Can I ask you a question, though? Didn't Comey, am I overstating this, and I want to be fair, but it seemed to me like Comey committed perjury last time he testified because he said that he had never participated in leaking while FBI director, and then Andy McCabe, who would know, later said that he had. Did anyone ask him about that?
Well, I don't know, but I guess it depends on what the meaning of leak is.
I guess it does.
And he took those FBI memos, FBI files of Donald Trump, and leaked them with the specific purpose of getting a special counsel appointed. You know, he ought to be under criminal investigation for taking those records and leaking them. And he's also under investigation about potentially taking classified information. And, you know, if you're under criminal investigation at the federal level and someone asks you questions about it in an official circumstance like this, you often take the fifth.
Are you starting to, meanwhile,
but he didn't.
George Papadopoulos was in prison until a minute ago. Are you getting the impression that the truly powerful really don't face legal consequences? It's always the little guy. It's always Jerome Corsi, some 72-year-old writer for Newsmax, who gets threatened with prison. But Jim Comey, the FBI director, gets to do whatever he wants. That kind of seems like the lesson.
Well, it's not necessarily powerful, but it's a partisan process. Because President Trump's powerful, but he's being attacked and abused.
Good point.
But if you're connected to the Democratic establishment, if there's a partisan nature here, which is to get Trump, you're protected. And Mr. Comey is Mueller's witness. He appointed Mueller. He's friends with Mueller. He worked with Mueller. He's friends with Mueller. And now we're seeing what happens if you're a friend of Mueller. You get protected by this Justice Department and this FBI. And if you're not a friend of Mueller, you'll be used and abused in the case of Cohen, who was used to go after Trump in dishonest ways, in my view, by this special counsel. And he's being abused and being thrown under the bus. Oh, yeah, we used his testimony. We were able to insert the word Russia 50 million times as a result of these plea deals that really didn't have anything to do with Russia collusion. But we're going to ask the court to allow him to go to jail for at least 3.5 years.
It's making a lot of us very cynical, and I wish it weren't, because I love this country. There was a ruling today pertaining to Judicial Watch and Hillary's emails. What happened?
Well, actually, it was yesterday. It was a big ruling by Judge Royce Lamberth, who opened up discovery into the Clinton email issue. He's angry about what the Justice Department and the FBI did. He fears that he was hoodwinked, or they tried to hoodwink Judicial Watch and the court in keeping these emails away from us. He's concerned that Hillary Clinton created this email system to avoid FOIA. And he really went after this Justice Department for coming into court and engaging in what he called chicanery to try to make excuses for and explain away the misconduct that saw these emails hidden and the email system used to avoid court scrutiny, congressional scrutiny, and questions from the American people. In fact, he asked, was Benghazi one of the reasons they didn't want us to know about these emails? So this discovery is significant.
Amazing.
And, you know, Congress is out to lunch on this, and Justice Department is on the other side, but the court wants more answers.
Whatever happened to the Republican Congress? We got to do a series on that, maybe in January. Tom, great to see you. Thank you. 3 whistleblowers have come forward with allegations of corrupt dealings at the Clinton Foundation. That's according to Republican Congressman Mark Meadows. He says the whistleblowers produced hundreds of pages of documents. They exposed misallocations of funds and the creation of quid pro quo arrangements during Hillary Clinton's time as Secretary of State. That would be influence peddling for those watching at home. The continuing investigation in the Clinton Foundation is the subject of a scheduled congressional hearing next week. Peter Schweizer is well-traveled in these waters. He's the author of Clinton Cash, and he joins us tonight. Peter, thanks very much for coming on. Who are these whistleblowers? Do we know?
We know that they have done work with the FBI, that they work with a consulting firm. We know that they did research that include apparently an interview or a discussion with the CFO of the Clinton Foundation. I have not seen the material yet, Tucker, but I think it further confirms this long-established pattern of serious questions about what the Clinton Foundation is up to. And, you know, if you think of the scales of justice, Tucker, look at what launched the Trump-Russia collusion investigation, which was the Steele dossier. By the way, I thought it was a good idea to investigate this. That launched the Trump investigation. On the Clinton Foundation side, we know that money was transferred to the Clintons. We know that they had agreed to disclose donors, that they hid those donations. You could find the $20 donation from a Mary Smith in Arkansas, but the $2 million donation from the chairman of a Russian-owned uranium company was not disclosed. We know that they lied to journalists about meetings that the journalists said took place, that the Clintons said never happened, and only when the journalists showed them the photographs did they admit that they happened. And we had an internal review by the Clinton Foundation itself, done by Simpson Thacher, which talked about the fact that there was a pay-to-play expectation by big donors. So this is going to further confirm what we've already known. And for the life of me, how you can launch an investigation based on the Steele dossier, which Comey admitted was salacious and unverified, but you can look at this other body of information and say, well, there's nothing to see here. Proves the point I think that Tom Fitton made earlier, that justice seems to be certainly not balanced and seems to be partisan.
So a pay-for-play offer to foreigners from a foundation run by the Secretary of State, I mean, that's in the criminal category, is it not?
Absolutely. I mean, people make this mistake all the time. They say to me, well, it's a charity. It's very, very clear. The bribery charges in the United States, the international bribery standards to which Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State committed the United States to, the international bribery standard says if you donate to a person, if you give money to a political figure, if you give to their family members, or if you give to their charity, that's all criminal if you're trying to engage in pay-to-play. And by the way, American companies who have given to legitimate charities in foreign countries for that purpose have been charged under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So it's a very serious issue.
So the line on the Clinton Foundation was always, as you just said, it's charity, and it continues its important work of fighting childhood obesity around the world, or whatever it was pretending to do. How is it doing now that there's no more influence to sell? Do we know?
Great question, Tucker. We know that donations are way down, off by more than 50%. Now, you would think that Bill and Hillary Clinton, she's not running for president. You'd think they'd have a lot of time on their hands to do a lot of fundraising for the Clinton Foundation, but the money has basically dried up, particularly from foreign entities. So this should be no surprise. And if you chart the rise of the Clinton Foundation, particularly with foreign donations, Tucker, it rises and falls with the political fortunes of the Clintons, which is just further evidence of why they were donating this money. And by the way, to the work of the Clinton Foundation as a charity, this internal review that was done by Simpson Thacher, they interviewed Clinton Foundation employees and asked them to rate the effectiveness of the Clinton Foundation as a charity on a scale from 1 to 10. The average Clinton Foundation employee gave it a 4. So they didn't consider it a very effective charity, even though that's where they worked.
If your employees are giving you a 4 out of a scale of 10, it's a problem. Peter Schweizer, always fact-based. I appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Dan Bongino is often on the show. He's a former Secret Service agent, an NRA TV spokesman, and the author of Spygate, the attempted sabotage of Donald J. Trump. You probably saw, Dan, as we did at the outset of the show, that there are these new documents pertaining to Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort, and in those is the word Russia. Now, that word is not explained, but it's repeated quite a bit. Is that evidence of a felony? When you use the word Russia over and over and over, that means the person about whom you're using it should be in jail. Is that the law? I'm just checking.
Well, maybe a grammatical felony if you spell it wrong, but the mentioning of Russia in a report is not a felony at all. You know, I mean, I love when you say that because it's true. They say it as if the mention of Russia somehow, it automatically imparts on someone an air of criminality. Yeah. It's not true, Tucker. I've been to Russia. I've never been interviewed by the FBI. I went there as a Secret Service agent. Yes, shockingly,
I went there to Russia in your capacity as a federal agent?
It gets better.
Oh, my gosh.
Wait, Tucker, it gets better. This is where it really gets nasty. The government asked me to go over there as a Secret Service agent. How is that? How could the federal government ask me to commit such a crime as going to Russia? I mean, this is utterly absurd.
Well,
it's
ridiculous.
A conspiracy
so vast, right? Of course.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
That's the hallmark of a conspiracy theory. It can never be disproven, right? So,
exactly.
Listen, there's some takeaways here, though. I think we can figure out right now and affirmatively say, looking at these paperwork, that Bob Mueller is not investigating collusion. Bob Mueller is investigating Donald Trump. This is the equivalent of a taxpayer-funded private investigator following Donald Trump and his team around to harass him for the rest of his presidency. This is a joke. It's an embarrassment. It's the stuff that's done in third world republics, and the media figures supporting this should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. This case is a farce.
Well, it's setting precedents I don't think any of us are going to want to live with for the rest of our lives. Seriously dangerous precedents about how the government behaves that I think really are a threat to democracy. Dan Bongino, great to see you always, despite your grave admission that you were once in Russia. See you next week.
Buddy. I'll see you
well, today's Friday. We hope all of you enjoy the weekend. But this is sad news. We've got a report tonight. You need to be careful. Keep your doors locked, your kids inside. America's streets and voting booths are no longer safe because after fewer than 2 weeks in jail, Vladimir Putin's hand-picked Russian spy / democracy hacker, George Papadopoulos, is once again free, released, walking among us. Slide the dresser in front of the door and say a prayer. No one's safe while he's out.